Have you ever taken an IQ test? Sometimes people keep taking them to see if they're more intelligent than what their previous test results had shown, and others never want to go near one for fear that they'll be stigmatized or ridiculed if they have a low score. Does this sound like you? Well, I've got some good news and some more good news. The good news. The kind of behavior I've just described is more reflective of your level of confidence more than it does your level of intellect. This is because IQ doesn't actually measure what we value as human beings, which is to have agency or the ability to be independent, to be successful in our goals, and to have well-being in mind, body, and spirit. The traditional IQ tests don't really predict the outcome of these values because they mostly only measure memory, linguistics, spatial awareness, and logic. Since these tests began, we've expanded our perspective of what intelligence really is, diving into other theories such as Howard Gardner's multiple intelligence and EQ tests, which is emotional quotient. Take, for example, a person like Rain Man, who has the exceptional memory but also has little interpersonal skills. Most would not consider this to be desirable because we value balance across the human abilities. So more good news. None of what I just explained really says anything about who you are as a person. Many intelligent people are lazy, cowardly, weak in character, unwise, and sometimes evil, whereas many dumb people are hardworking, brave, personable, wise, and virtuous. Everything in between also exists. So how can we measure our own value so as to begin working on improving ourselves? That's right, the TSQ, or Truth-Seeking Quotient. According to the founder of TSQ theory, James Barton, it is a concept used to help self-diagnose your relationship with truth. Understanding this very relationship is what can help you determine something more concrete about who you currently are and help you become who you want to be. This is because truth is manageable. It's tangible. You can acquire it and use it just as you would anything else. Trying to up your IQ, however, it's not very fruitful or relevant as an aspiration because there are strong limits as to how much you can increase your IQ abilities anyway. Truth is what allows us to make progress, to help others, to succeed in our work, to make better connections, to maintain relationships and become virtuous. Using it does not necessitate a high IQ, nor does it necessitate a racial makeup, a culture, or a religion. It simply needs to be accepted. Now, once a person accepts that they must work on their relationship with truth, they can excel far faster and much better than if they were to get better at solving logical problems. Because human beings are more than just logical. We are emotional, irrational, passionate, loving, fearful, and most of all ignorant. We know so little about why we are here, what we must do, and how. Yet because we are fearful, we would much rather state what the truth is about things rather than humble ourselves and then work to find the truth. So, if you feel this moment is prompting you to begin a journey towards building a relationship to truth, let's jump right into understanding what TSQ is all about. Alright, so what are the characteristics of a high TSQ individual according to James Barton? A high TSQ individual embodies both passive TSQ and active TSQ. Passive TSQ is about being teachable and rationally evaluating new facts and ideas, even if they contradict your long-held beliefs. Active TSQ is about a deep, healthy curiosity and spending effort in researching and investigating particular subjects. High TSQ people have a natural tendency towards raising their TSQ even higher. They aim to eat healthy so as to preserve and enhance their cognitive powers. They gravitate towards other high TSQ individuals, but also outreach to the average and low TSQ people because of duty and compassion. Now, after having read this section, I thought it was important to say that it doesn't really matter what a person's political ideology is. Ultimately, we all want the well-being of ourselves and our loved ones. And TSQ seems to imply here that high TSQ individuals necessarily incur the responsibility to elevate lower TSQ individuals, although with humility. So in order to do that, it may be more important to understand the relationship between TSQ and IQ, which we examine in the following section. There is a great importance in boosting the TSQ of high IQ people. They have great potential for good or harm, and so boosting their TSQ is especially useful for themselves and society. A person of low TSQ, but with apparent high IQ, is wasting their potential, and if they have fallen for false doctrines and harnessed their intelligence unhelpfully, then it is harmful. How vulnerable are people of high intelligence from subliminal messages, behavioral modification techniques, advertisements, redundant vows, and emotional issues? It is the position of real intelligence to do self-diagnostics and other inner techniques to protect and free up their intelligence from negative or limiting influences. Some sincere effort will be needed to identify the personal blind spots and subtle biases. It can happen that a high IQ person will come up with many clever reasons to justify their false beliefs and, as they see it, to win arguments. That is most unfortunate for them. It is as if their IQ is working against their best interests and keeping them trapped in false beliefs. There can be a high intelligence which is awake and healthy, or half asleep or trance-like and self-sabotaging. The awakened, healthy intelligence values high truth-seeking quotient and aims to protect and strengthen it in themselves, and then humanity consequently. Someone may have a high IQ and yet use their intellect only on trivial subjects. In that sense, due to low TSQ, their high IQ is wasted. So TSQ level is also based on the individual's interest and active research into profound and fundamental subjects. Someone may have average IQ, but because of high TSQ, they can focus on fundamental important topics and make great progress. High TSQ is of more value than high IQ, but both should be cultivated. Affirm that your IQ and TSQ will work in harmony in accordance with the highest good. Alright, so personally I think I'd say I like that, and I think I like the fact that there's a link that is made between both. I mean, they're intertwined for sure. I think it would be disingenuous to say that IQ doesn't feed into TSQ, but as previously discussed, it's not necessary to cultivate as well. So, yeah, I wouldn't be so sure that TSQ has more value for the very same reason that it's linked to IQ to a degree, but I would certainly say that TSQ is primary. There's no use in sort of having a powerful engine in the car if we're just going to go slow, right? We're just going to drive slowly. So it brings us to the next question. How would we measure TSQ to begin with? So, what is a TSQ scoring system? How would it work? According to James Barton, there are many IQ tests and scoring systems. But what about for TSQ? The most basic system would be binary, i.e. to simply recognize a particular statement, behavior, or person's current attitude to be either low TSQ or high TSQ. Our truth-seeking quotient is multifaceted, and a range of characteristics would need to be taken into account when evaluating someone's TSQ. A high TSQ individual embodies both passive TSQ and active TSQ. High TSQ means the awareness of and avoidance of logical fallacies, but also the awareness and correction of character flaws. Certain beliefs act as dampeners which can greatly cripple our objective truth-seeking. For example, if someone deeply believes that they or anyone cannot know the truth of certain subjects, then that belief will take away the will to properly investigate and may even deafen us to the progress that others have made regarding understanding the topic. So here's my opinion. Scoring one's TSQ is a little tough, because we're working with truth to begin with, which is mercurial, and its nature is constrained by our subjective interpretations. In my opinion, the idea should not be to create a metric which measures how much truth someone holds, because truth-seeking is the goal. So how do we measure things like open-mindedness, curiosity, emotional restraint, and a willingness to learn? I imagine we would need to design a conversation that helps us score how receptive we are in each category. For example, The person taking the test would need to submit a questionnaire card exposing their deeply held beliefs and have a 1 to 10 scale of strength on each point. Then the examiner could present diametric facts and then assess how often the subject interrupts the conversation versus listens to full sentences, whether they argue with resistance, meaning that they try to counter the fact, versus being inquisitive to learn the opposing view, and finally, how well the subject is able to steelman their opposing worldview. For those who don't know what steelmanning is, it's the process of reinforcing your opponent's worldview to clarify it. This is a good segue into exploring the nature of truth. There are two kinds of truth, transient and transcendental. Transient truths have not always been so, can be changed and eventually will not be so. Transcendental truths are eternal, unchanging, and universal. It means that they are true in any possible universe. Truth is eternal and worthy of deep study. My opinion of this is that I wish it was a little bit more elaborated, because the nature of truth is an interesting topic filled with valuable knowledge, such as Hume's ought from is, the truth paradox as well, epistemological connections to knowledge, memory, language, semantics, etc. But for the purposes of TSQ, I believe the two types which he mentioned, which was transient and transcendental, I think they're sufficient. He does have another part that he speaks of, and he says we should look at the difference between facts and interpretation, which I believe is incredibly important. So I'll read that next. He says, people correctly base their beliefs on facts. However, just because many facts seem to back up your position does not make it necessarily true. The facts themselves may be true, but they could be misinterpreted due to various forms of inner bias and fallacy. According to Wikipedia, confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information that confirms or supports one's prior personal beliefs or values. Have the intense wish that your interpretation of facts is fair and accurate. Now, I have an important clarification here. It's crucial to be aware of the transient nature of some truths and also be acquainted with transcendental truths, if any exist. People do not always agree on what is a nominal, absolute truth. The truth paradox that I mentioned, for example, it demonstrates this. Nietzsche had said, there are no facts, only interpretations. But is that not just another interpretation? I mean, if one says there is no such thing as absolute truth, is that the absolute truth? This in mind, I think a person is better equipped to help others, which brings us to the next section, right? If we understand our relationship to truth, it's something that allows us to help other people with a lower TSQ. And that's something James Barton also explores in his next section entitled, How to Help Someone with Low TSQ. Teach by example. Concentrate on improving your own TSQ and set a good example for others. You can also share helpful tips and techniques as found in this book, along with other advice that you feel is appropriate. In my opinion, I think that's great. I don't see TSQ as being something that's directly taught, and it must be learned through experimentation and studying and having conversations. It wouldn't hurt to discuss TSQ, of course, in a mutual way. Overall, I believe we are probably a lot more equal in our TSQs than there is disparity, at base anyway. And if people were to engage themselves with TSQ, try to really look for the truth and to better their characteristics, I think we'd all realize we can pretty much be equal on that footing and that everybody just has the same motivations. In conclusion, there are more sections that introduce what TSQ is all about, and I highly encourage you to read it for yourself by going to hightsq.com. Furthermore, there are 5 modules which focus on teaching people the tools and methods necessary to improve TSQ and ultimately improve your quality of life and humanities as well. There are reviews introducing these modules that you have access to on the website at hightsq.com. If you find this project can bring you value, please consider subscribing to the community once you're on the site, and feel free to contribute your ideas too. My name is James Barton, and thanks for watching.